Morning, everyone. My name is Jeremiah Mitoko. I'll be leading this 8-week Encore learning course on populism in the US. As far as my background is concerned, I have a PhD in public policy from George Mason University. My research interest has focused on institutions of market democracy, development, and governance. This short video is meant to give you a feel of what the course will be like. I like to use contrasts and contradictions to prompt discussion. Populism became an area of public concern after the election of Barack Obama. This concern has only increased with Donald Trump and the Brexit vote. This concern became even more serious as some populist movements have encouraged their followers to ignore health guidelines on face covering and physical distancing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Populism is generally defined as the rejection of established structures of power and dominant ideas and values, flaunting of established rules of engagement, appeal to popular emotions, prejudice, and bigotry based on charisma rather than issues, anti-expertise, anti-elitism, pro-nationalist sentiments, appeal to large masses of poorly organized people into action against privileges of the better off, its partisanship, conflictual and antagonistic logic, its lack of decorum, collectivist language, and misinformation. In this course, we want to go beyond this definition. We will be looking at the Tea Party movement, the Bata movement, Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street movement, Black Lives Matter movement. We will see what these movements have in common and what are their differences. I encourage you to sign up for this course if you are interested in questions like, why did so many white women in voting for Trump choose a party that hates women as a matter of public policy? Why is the focus on US presidency occurring at a time when voters express great opposition and resentment to Washington and big government? What explains the youthfulness, radical militancy, social media prominence, inclusiveness, globalization, rejection of materialism, respectability, and electoral politics in Black Lives Matter movement and Occupy Wall Street movement? What explains the anger and aggression towards Obama in the Bata movement? And what explains the gap between the populist movement professed goals, for example, cutting taxes, dismantling big government, and the social welfare state, and its most important unifying sentiments, for example, racially based hatred for Obama? Does concentration of power matter in populist movements? And also, if you want to do something about populism, I encourage you to sign up for this course. Thank you.
How a nation chooses to tax itself goes to the very heart of nation building. It is not surprising that in an election year, candidates put forth a bag full of tax proposals. This course is going to examine tax policy issues relating to the federal tax system. Each session will include 3 or 4 issues, allowing some in-depth discussion of each issue. And at the first session, participants can suggest topics for inclusion in the later sessions. Let me give a couple examples of what I mean by issues. First, under the individual income tax, we have one rate schedule for married couples filing jointly and a different rate schedule for single individuals. As a result, if 2 individuals who may have been living together for many years decide to marry, they may experience a marriage penalty or a marriage bonus. This doesn't make a lot of sense in today's world. Second, the corporate income tax involves a number of distortions. It favors retaining earnings rather than distributing dividends. It favors debt finance rather than equity finance. These distortions might be addressed by allowing companies to deduct dividends paid. So both dividends paid and interest expense would be deductible at the corporate level, companies would continue to pay tax on retained earnings. Third, Senators Warren and Sanders proposed an annual net wealth tax, the base being net wealth at current market values. This would be an easy tax to administer if net wealth comprised marketable securities that are traded on a public market. Not so easy if we have closely held businesses, farmland, valuable art collections, various kinds of contingent interests. And finally, if the US is ever going to restructure its tax system, it may need to adopt a new tax for the tax arsenal, namely the value-added tax. Properly designed, this tax is a tax on consumption collected at each stage of production and distribution. I expect to have one session focused on this tax. Please join me in October. We should have a lot of fun. And thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Yi-ting. I'm the instructor of the course, Government and Foreign Policy of Contemporary China. Now I'm going to give a brief introduction of this course. This is the most recent news. Chinese researchers who has hid in Chinese embassy in San Francisco for months recently was arrested because she hid her ties with Chinese military. And here is another article by a famous diplomatic media says that Australia is resetting its national security and defense strategy against China, mostly because what Chinese have done against its neighboring country, including cyber attacks against Australia. And here is what's happened within China. The country have imprisoned nearly 2 million of its Muslim ethnic minority in northwest China, and there's many messages shows there is very serious torture in those concentration camps. Here is what happened in Hong Kong. The Chinese government have set a series of national security laws try to control Hong Kong people, which caused Hong Kong lose its freedom and the rule of law. And you can see many Hong Kong people protest on the street at the risk of their life and personal safety. This course will try to answer first, why have China have done all those things we mentioned before? And the second, does there any specific cultural, historical, or political economic factors that cause the country have all those behaviors? And the third is, what are the differences in the political and economic institutions between China and those of democratic countries, or even other authoritarian countries? The goal of its course is to introducing the political institutions of contemporary China and the country's foreign policy. And show how the foreign policy of Chinese government might have impacts the world, especially on democratic countries. And then this course will discuss how the democratic world should respond to such influences. The uniqueness of this course, firstly, is include Chinese study literatures from Taiwan. As Taiwan is part of the democratic world and is a Chinese-speaking society, it can provide more critical perspectives from democratic Chinese society. Then we also invite 3 young guest speakers with various backgrounds. We have speakers from China, Hong Kong, and Uyghur, which is that Muslim minorities I mentioned before. A little bit about me. I have got my master's degree in national development in Taiwan, and my thesis topic is about Taiwanese firms investing in China, and I also have deep understanding on political development in both China and Taiwan. And then I have served as assistant of the resident of a Taiwanese Firms Association in China. Then after I come here, I have the experience of assist Taiwan's most big economic think tanks to do academic interviews to think tanks at DC on the topic of trade affairs between US and China. This is the end of the introduction. Looking forward to seeing you in the class.
Anton Chekhov once said, "Any idiot can face a crisis. It's day-to-day living that wears you out." As we read Chekhov's stories and plays, we get the feeling he understands what we're going through. His stories tend to be short and are often very funny. The characters are universal and timeless despite their multiple Russian names and lives spent in 19th century Russian villages or cities. We find miscommunication between neighbors and family members and wasted anxiety on differences in wealth and rank, personages falling in love despite their best efforts not to do so, displays of pettiness and greed on one hand and generosity and genuine love on the other. Chekhov first started writing when he was still a teenager. He needed to help pay his gymnasium fees and helps his bankrupt family. He did that living alone for 2 years and publishing a number of things in magazines that were humorous magazines that were something like a cross between Mad Magazine and the Reader's Digest. They were aimed at the newly literate population of cities. He then moved to Moscow, continuing to write as an impoverished medical student, and by the time he was 23 years old, he had published 129 stories. They paid the bills. There are now over 200 stories in all, as well as the famous plays and a number of novellas. All of them can be found in the Delphi Complete Works of Anton Chekhov for $1.95 on Kindle. The Complete Works of Anton Chekhov. It's 5,770 pages. Obviously nothing that anyone can finish, but the stories are listed in chronological order as well as in alphabetical order, and you can pick and choose, and they're beautiful. So I very much hope that you will spend some time reading them and perhaps join this class to discuss them. We'll have 4 sessions, one focusing on the comic stories, one on the more serious ones, a section on 2 of his plays, Uncle Vanya and Cherry Orchard, and the last one will be sort of participants' choice, where you will bring up the stories that were most meaningful to you. We'll break up into smaller groups and try to have chats there. In each session, I'll try to provide some background knowledge, background information that I've collected, and then we will discuss the actual stories to the best of our ability in using new technology. Thank you.
Hi. If you're looking for this course in the catalog, it's listed under the literature and writing section, which is kind of correct, but kind of not. I mean, we are going to look at some older literature and see what the language was like. I assume many people in this room have read Shakespeare, for example, and we can kind of make out Shakespeare, get by the these and those and the tises, but you're missing some of the dirty jokes, because some of what used to rhyme in English doesn't rhyme anymore. If you go farther back to Chaucer, oh my God, you need to look with the translation into modern English. And if you go even farther back, the first recognized literature in English, the Venerable Bede, I mean, you might as well be reading Icelandic for all you can make out of it. So we're going to examine how the language changed, but more important, what made it change, what factors contributed to that. and the linguistic science behind all of that and how we ended up speaking American English. Well, do we speak standard American English? There are also social dialects and regional dialects. With the world as it is today, do what we know about, quote, historical linguistics, does that still hold true? Or is the web contributing, is the web making the way we talk get closer together with other dialects of English or farther apart? It's just fascinating because the original discipline in linguistics was historical. How did we get to where we are? But you have to throw in all these other factors like social linguistics. I mean, the Romans conquered Britain. How come we're not talking some language that's more related to French than something that's more related to German? And that there's social factors involved in that. Some of the other factors we'll take a look at is, language and the story of it is involved in everything that we're doing and all kinds of disciplines, and we have to look at that.
Hi everybody, it's great to be back with you again. I think you can tell from this list that the things the prophets were worried about 3,000 years ago are very similar to the ones in our news today. Do these look familiar? Now let me introduce you to some of the prophets that we're going to meet. Those of you who are Christians may remember that Jesus began his ministry, at least in Luke's gospel, by quoting from the prophet Isaiah, Isaiah 61. And again, Paul in his epistles was constantly referring to, and the prophets are frequently quoted in literature. The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith's famous economic treatise, the title is based on a phrase used in Isaiah several times. And the Bartlett's Quotations has pages and pages of famous quotations from the prophets. And in music, there are countless examples of great musical themes, and popular as well as classical, that are derived from the prophets. In the course, I'm going to show you a video from the London Symphony Orchestra with a huge chorus playing the Hallelujah chorus from Handel's Messiah, and the words of the Hallelujah chorus come from the prophets. And also I'll be including Louis Armstrong in the Dry Bones, that's from Ezekiel, and also Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the famous old song based on the book of Daniel. Were there women named as prophets in the Bible? Definitely yes, and I'll be including them. Also, I'm going to include a workbook, sort of a study guide if you want to use it. That'll be available free in the course to get more detail on all of these amazing personalities that we'll be discussing. To finish up, here's a quote that George Washington loved. It's, they shall all sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid. And he was just trying to use a phrase that made it clear that the new country would be trying to protect the rights of all of its citizens. It's quite beautiful, and one of the hundreds that we'll probably be looking at in the course. I wish you the very best and hope that you'll join me in this course.
Hi, I'm Marty Suydam, the instructor for the 6th session course, Writing a Memoir. I took this class with Encore Learning in 2014 and have been teaching it each fall semester since 2017. I'd taken other writing and memoir courses in prior years, but it was this course that kick-started my writing. When I committed to teach the class, I went through many texts, almost all written by professional writers, journalists, or professors. I couldn't find any written by non-professionals for people like us, amateurs. I had also published a couple memoir books and discovered many things that took lots of extra time once I had written enough for a book and started working with a publisher. Then I learned the things I should have known before starting to write. What I discovered was most memoir books are the same and covered what the authors thought was important in the first chapter. The rest of each book contained examples of their writing. I decided to write a course text for this course organized on all things I wished I could have read in the books by experts. Thus, I wrote Writing a Memoir, A Personal Journey. The chapters are about all the things I found essential in writing that were not in the text by the pros. There are many writing examples, but not just my own. Most are by Encore Learning authors, members of our writing groups that formed after members took the course. Each session involves 50% lecture, 50% reading and discussion of pieces members have written for that class in small groups. Each lecture, for example, is not found in any other publication. Lesson 1, Getting Started. This chapter and lecture is learning about what memoirs are, what experts recommend, and understanding word processing software tools available and not normally taught. For example, Microsoft Word that makes writing much easier. Lesson 2, Research. This chapter covers methods of discovering and using research sources for your writing. Lesson 3, Story Writing. This is a core to good memoir writing, telling entertaining and informative stories. Lesson 4, Organizing. This is about how to organize your source materials and your writing products. Lesson 5, Permissions. This is about copyright, privacy, and getting permission to use work of others, and even your own, if previously published. Lesson 6, Publication. This is a common sense chapter on publishing experience for non-professionals. The different writing assignments provide experience in the more common forms of memoir writing. Hope to actually see and or virtually see some of you in the fall. Thank you.